What else are you? Tired?
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you chose challenging situations. I would like to end with a story, but first we have Mr. Chris. Some important announcements.
The first is just to say that we've got 2 study groups around town. We decided to be flexible.
I have one more thing. Chris asked me to collect names of people.
Okay. Around the turn of the century, 1890s, something like that, there was a circus in England, and there was an elephant in the circus who had turned into what they called a rogue elephant. He was no longer obeying commands. He was dangerous. He had hurt his trainer badly by throwing him aside. And so the fellow who was head of the circus decided that they were going to execute him. And of course, being the good entrepreneur that he was going to open the execution of the elephant to the crowds. Because, you know, that was, especially in England, you know, watching something or someone die was a big deal. So they had this thing all set up. They had the crowds everywhere. They had the men with the guns. They were going to shoot him. And they had the elephant all protected from everyone else because he'd gotten very dangerous. And the crowds are there eating their popcorn and drinking their drinks and much merriment. And there was a man in the crowd watching all of this. And he walked up and he talked to the fellow who owned the circus. And he said, I'll tell you what, make you a bet. If I can, very quickly, in front of everyone, make this elephant obey and prove to you by different demonstrations that you can trust him again, will that be entertainment enough for the crowd that you will not shoot him, that you will put him back in service? The ringleader thought about it and he said, okay, profit motive, entertaining the crowd. Yeah, if I can entertain the crowd, wow the crowd, and get my money's worth for this, and continue the elephant because I would have to replace him, right? That's going to cost me. Okay, I'll do it. Conditional clause. So the man walks up to the edge of the ring, and as he does, of course, the elephant lifts his trunk, you know, at him, and the man stands outside the ring and just starts talking, and talking very quietly. Nobody can really hear him. The elephant lowers his trunk, cocks his head a little bit, leans forward a little bit. And then the man opens the gate and walks in with the elephant. And the crowd, you know, because they've seen this elephant is really dangerous. And standing right inside the ring, this man continues to talk. And the elephant walks over to him. And the elephant lays his trunk on his shoulder. And the man starts to stroke it. And then he gives him some commands. No one can hear. And the elephant bows and he does all these things. And the crowd is going insane. Insane. And when the man walks out, you know, everybody's really pleased. They've had their show. It's wonderful. What a transition. The man walks, he said, okay, now do you promise me that you will save this elephant? All I need to do is talk to your trainer and I promise you he will be just fine. Everybody's happy. But the owner says, I have got to know. I've got to know what you did, what you said. He said, I just gave him commands. I told him he was okay. In Indian, in Hindu. He was homesick. He missed his language. He didn't understand anymore. He was overwhelmed and didn't understand anymore. I'm going to teach your trainer how to speak to him in Hindi. He'll be fine. And the man left. And the owner was just so amazed and so thrilled. And finally, he turned to his trainer. He said, after this man had talked to him, he said, who was that? He said, you don't know who that was? It was Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling. It's a true story. So what we need to do is understand what is happening with anything like this. And you've just experienced several ways to begin to understand. So we will see you tomorrow with even more understanding and practice. All right. I was asked by Blair yesterday, early in the day, some of the books that I have found influential in what I do. And I also heard Judy mentioning Virginia Satir this morning. So I'll have to mention some videotapes, and any videotape that you can get a hold of with Virginia Satir, and do it.
I watched her self-worth last night.
Uh-huh.
It was very interesting. Hadn't expected the birth, the baby
Right.
process at all. Very interesting.
Yeah. She does excellent work. And to watch her is the best, because she does so much with her body and her voice tone, how she interacts and moves with people. But here are a couple. A book that's really old, and I think it's been republished and updated, Influencing with Integrity by Jeannie Laborde. I think is an excellent book. And other people understand it who don't have NLP background. Because it gets the reframing. It gets something we're going to do this morning that's not in your books. But Chris and I were talking about earlier, and we have come up with an idea, and then we had someone else who had a question that it fits perfectly. So when that sort of thing happens, I go.
There's also a great workbook that goes with it, if you can get that.
A workbook with Influencing with
Right.
Integrity?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. In this book, she's got a process called the Parts Party that we're going to do this morning. Very, very good. If you get a chance to ever have a workshop with a man called Lucas Dirks, D-E-R-K-S, do it. Lucas is out of Amsterdam. I believe it's Amsterdam. And he is the person I mentioned the other day who is the sociologist, neurolinguistic programming, and he talks about some of the things that we will be touching on this morning. He's got a book called The Social Panorama that has been directly interpreted from Danish into English. And it's rough. It's pretty rough reading. And as far as I know, it hasn't been updated. But if you can slog through that, it's worth it as well. The Color Purple is a fiction that I like a lot. The movie was wonderful. The book is wonderful. So much to me about choices. Those turning points in our life where we make a decision and how it changes everything. And also the influence a good model on someone makes. And it's about forgiveness as well. I think it's a beautiful book. Another nonfiction is Systems of Survival by Jane Jacobs. She's an anthropologist who I think is still alive and in fact living in Canada, last I heard. She wrote The Death and Birth of American Cities years ago. Some of you may know that book. Systems of Survival is a book that's influenced me from the moment I read it and still does. It's always there in my mind about the two major maps of reality that civilizations in history have chosen to solve problems. There is the commercial map, trade, capital, markets. And then there's the guardian or governmental branches, and how each one has an entire set of principles and presuppositions to it. Why each one is needed, and the disaster that happens when you blend them. And she gives as examples the mafia, because in the mafia you have markets and you have force, and you blend them. She also gives an example of the military-industrial complex. So you have force, the military, and the industry, and you blend them. And what happens when you do that? So it's incredibly interesting. It's done in a dialogue so that there are different characters that take different positions and bring different information in. Very interesting. The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, and actually I like the Fifth Discipline field book even better. Peter Senge came up and articulated in book form the systems theory, how everything is connected. If you pull on a string over here, it affects something way over here. Remember yesterday when we were talking to Blair about his situation with the recalcitrant father and son situation. There were many aspects of that system affecting that conversation that until you stood back and you saw it, didn't make sense. Once you stood back and saw all of the influences in that system, so you can have a system of two people, and that gives you information. But you often need to step back and see who are with these two people, who are influencing these people. And then you get, aha, now I understand why this behavior is here. And if you step back further into cultures, so you've got families, cultures, governments, all of these things influence us. So he talks a lot about that in business.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you are working with some organization or even with individuals and you find you're not getting the bigger picture, do you go broader? And is that, I'm just wondering if that's something you do in terms of go bigger?
Go bigger. And to do that, you need to step back a little bit, right? So if you think about perspective, if you're that close to a wall, you don't see much of it. It's just this little area here. To get it, you have to stand back a little bit. So dissociating from your own expectations and feelings helps and broadens the picture. So stepping back, getting more. There's a point at which you need to stop. But one of the things that is fun to do, oh, here's another book. It's a book by Irene Sanders. This is, okay, here we go. Irene Sanders, and I think it's called Science and the New Technology, but I'm not sure. The word science is in it. It's the only book she's written, so you can find it, but it's about systems and how you work with corporations to elicit some of the influences in the systems. Margaret Wheatley, have you ever heard of her? She talks a lot about, get books by her, and you'll see her referenced here in the Fifth Discipline as well. And you'll see how this fits very well with neuro-linguistic programming. I had the pleasure of last June attending in Helsinki the first international conference for the Society for Organizational Learning, and Peter Senge started that. It was an accident, one of those wonderful serendipitous things, and there were hundreds of people there, and I was stunned at how many of the NLP community were there. Just showed up and go, oh, I know you. So there's a lot of fertilization, cross-fertilization happening there. They're having a national conference in January in Boston. So if you go on the internet and look up the Society for Organizational Learning, you'll find a lot of that information. And so they talk a lot about feedback loops. So what do you learn when you do something? If you're not continually feeding back the learning, you're in trouble. especially in today's